Hi, this is Keith Carson, Board of Supervisors, 5th District, Albany, Berkeley, Piedmont, Emeryville. Another section of Just Ask Keith, which is every week, resident from District 5 poses a question to me. This week it comes from a Berkeley resident who would like me to respond to what we just celebrated Juneteenth. What does Juneteenth mean to me, and what are my thoughts about reparations now that it's on the national spotlight again? Juneteenth is one of those times of the year that it reminds us to reflect on the fact that in history, in 1865, it was actually in April and not in June that General Granger went to Texas, dispatched by President Abraham Lincoln to announce in Texas that the slavery had ended. That was 2 years after the proclamation that the president had given that said that all African Americans, all slaves were free. But it didn't happen, and the fighting didn't stop in the South until 2 years later, and then it was announced then. That was 400 years actually after the first Africans were recorded to have been left Africa and dispatched to the Americas as slaves. And it was estimated that about 11 million African slaves came to this country and were slaves here, working for free during that whole time. So I think it's important to put that into context. It was even 2 years after the announcement that made by President Lincoln that all slaves were free, that Texas actually conceded to that, and that's because they lost the Civil War. And that was 400 years after slavery began here in this country. Reparations has actually been an ongoing discussion even right after the announcement that slaves were free, and that's because there was some reference to each slave receiving 40 acres and a mule, which during Reconstruction time period actually was rescinded way back then to not give those who were descendants of slavery or slaves themselves, people who had previously been slaves, the 40 acres and a mule, but actually some financial compensation, which still wasn't realized. I think that is very important to proceed talking about reparations because of the fact that the destruction, for the most part, of the African American experience here started at the advent of slavery. The destruction was the destruction of the family, which is a key essential element for survival in many societies, for individuals to be surrounded, embraced, taught by family members, and as a result of that, the African American experience here started with the destruction of the family structure, while other families were still intact, especially the white families, the white southern families, the white northern families still had their family structure intact, which is the basis for a lot of us being able to go forward. The other destruction was not having a community or society in which to kind of rely on, meaning educational system, medical system, all of those things were really denied African slaves. It happened that since they were divided from that structure going forward, they couldn't obtain wealth because of the fact that the infrastructure for wealth didn't exist really in the black community. And sadly to say, I can even remember in my own time, lifetime here in Alameda County and born and raised in Berkeley, that there were African Americans who were not employed even in some of the restaurants on Shattuck Avenue and in Jack London Square, and that there were picketing and riots going on for equality back then. Again, I think that all goes towards reparations, because if you have a family structure, if you have a societal structure that is fair and equitable, it gives you a fair chance to advance like everybody else. And during that same time period, while that did not exist for the African American or black family here in this country, it continued to exist for the white society in this country, that infrastructure was always intact. And we see the results of that playing out today in terms of who still majority runs this country in terms of business, decisions that are made on a political level, and the structure that takes place in our communities, the inequities that still happen, really kind of started when slavery started, if you want to look at it from that perspective. So I do believe that there should be reparations, and I think that it's always been an ongoing discussion, and until we actually find some resolve to it, we have to continue to increase the knowledge around slavery, around the impacts of slavery, about the destruction of the African American family and what those impacts have been. And that's why society, I think, really has to pause, stop, and restructure itself going forward if we want to have equity, if we want to have equality. Next week, we'll look forward to your questions on Ask Keith. acgov.org is where we ask you to solicit your questions, and I look forward to them. Thank you very much.